Stephynie, I wanted to get into the real business that you do. Some people have called you fairly or unfairly Olivia Pope, and for people who don't watch TV and are in Washington circles, she's sort of a TV character of a fixer who fixes the president's and other senior people's problems in Washington whenever they're on the wrong side of the law or on the wrong side of some ethical issue. And they needed to not just go away, but sort of be fixed so that they can go on being who they think they are. Now, you told me that a lot of the stuff that you do, you're not really a PR firm. You're not really crisis communications per se. It's not really about the media. So that's where the Olivia Pope thing gets a little wrong, because she's all about, she then takes control of the media and the narrative
Exactly.
and pull that sort of surface story. But the story on this podcast today that we were sort of going to talk about is kind of what's on the bottom of the iceberg, the stuff under the waters. And that's kind of what interests me generally, but certainly in this context of a show about the future, because if there's stuff under the surface that's bigger than what's on top, my theory would be, well, that has some implication for what's going to happen. So white collar crimes, money laundering, bid rigging, skimming, bribery. I have listed a bunch of white collar crimes right now. What in the world is all that about? Like, you're fascinated by crime and you want to make it go away for people? I mean,
Well,
sounds kind of crazy.
It feels kind of crazy too. It doesn't really go away. The allegations most often remain the same. Sometimes we can get it lesser. Sometimes it really just depends. It really depends on what the allegation is. It is fascinating. We move people through their error in judgment differently. We do it out of media, out of paparazzi, depending on if it's an athlete or a celebrity or a high wealth or an executive. We move them through the process of a judgment that they have made that would cause increasing damage to their family and to their reputation. Ultimately, Trond, they still do get a consequence, but they get to go through their consequence without, cameras outside their kid's school or, a news station outside of their wife's chemo. They still have the consequence. It's just a lot more discerning. And we follow, one of the differentiators with us is we love to be proactive about this. It is yet to happen where we've been able to be proactive. It's always reactive. But we are there kind of before, during, and after for support. So our firm is different because we set up all professional services. Because after you go through such a massive scandal or a scheme or a Ponzi or whatever it happens to be, you're wrecked for a long time. You're lacking in trust. You're lacking in confidence. Your family is lacking in reputation, in everything that touches you. There's health issues. There's all kinds of things that happen. And our firm handles all of those partnerships to be able to support and hold space for your family.
So let's dig into this, maybe perhaps sort of away from your clients for a moment. Just think about some things that are in the public eye. Tiger Woods is one that comes to mind. There was somewhat of a crisis there for a while, right? What was that issue about, and how much got out at the right times versus what do you think was actually going on? And is that an example of a situation where your service would have been an interesting one to pursue if you were at either side of that crisis? And it's, I guess, still unfolding, right? Because the individuals involved here, they're still there. And, it's a long story. But anyway, am I even close to the kinds of things that you could have represented either Tiger or some other women or his ex-wife or, I don't know, even his sponsors? Like, what is that a good example of something that needs a crisis fixer?
Absolutely. That's an amazing example, and because not only is it an amazing example, Trond, you really hit all aspects of it. So really, in this case, who would be the hiring party and what would be the measurement of success? And the issue is we generally have to pick one because there's conflict. And so really how I want to sound very brainy here and give you my giant methodology. It's really, there's no methodology. It's truth and trust. So I will help you if you walk in and you are 1,000% honest and you've made a mistake. It becomes more difficult as Mr. Woods did, where he kept covering and covering and covering. The media was an absolute frenzy. And the reason why they were a frenzy is because the legal advice that he was getting and the business advice he was getting is to pay off and cover up. It's just not how we just don't do things. Both fortunately and unfortunately, we live in America, and America is one of the most forgiving countries ever. If you come out and you say it and you state it and it is real and it is honest and it is true, and then you go away, everybody stops talking about it because it doesn't matter anymore. It's like, it's kind of old news. Something else happens. Could we have been more strategic as far as the media play? Absolutely. Could we have really done a lot around advising? Again, for sure we could. I'm not sure if we would have ever taken him as a client. Because, let's see, how do you say this? I believe that every person has their own version of the truth. Sadly, judges generally like one version of the truth. And so you have to be very careful about who you support and who you are as your reputation. My reputation is everything to me. I don't overpromise and I overdeliver every single time. But you absolutely nailed it. That would be a prime person for moving through a crisis journey much differently than unfolded for him. And as you so eloquently put, continues to unfold for him.
Well, so let's leave that example for a second, because I think, that's like its own circle of podcasts. You can go through that, but we're
going to start a series.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So that issue at least maybe brings to mind some of the issues that we're actually talking about. The college admission scandal is kind of a different animal, but on the other hand, it's also been out there, and it clearly speaks to so many Americans for sure, because paying for college and getting into college is something every parent goes through. It would seem that also there are some narratives, and it's a hard thing to be on one particular side of that scandal. I mean, you're fighting a really uphill battle there. Is that? Let's talk about that for a second. I'm just curious, is this always the case? That's why you would get hired, right? Because it is an uphill battle. It's like almost a lost battle unless you come up with some secret cards.
Well, and again, I hate to sound like a broken record. I say this all the time. Bad news doesn't get better with time. And the more you spin it and spin it and spin it, people get irritated and they stop fighting for you. So, I could name a bunch of people in this and I'll refrain from doing that. But let's just talk about one really quick. Felicity Huffman. Okay. She interviewed, I think, 2 or 3 attorneys when she was going through this. And she got 2 or 3 different pieces of advice that is none of our business. Okay. But what she did was she raised her hand, she signaled early, and I think she was in and out within 10 days. She was working within 6 months. So that's a great example. She went out and said, look, white privilege, look, my husband and I, my girls, every single thing I did was wrong. My biggest regret is showing my girls that this was acceptable. That's my biggest regret. And so whatever her advice was from the people that she sought out, she didn't fight it and she knew what she had done, okay? We could have done that with other people's stories along the way. Our issue was there was so many, okay, there was recordings, there was text messages, there was letters, there was personal conversations, and everybody was like, in the crowds, in the groups, everybody's like, wait, what? What's the big deal? I don't understand. So what? It was a donation. Or so what? It was this. Or so what? There was no personal responsibility and accountability. And so we have to remember 3 things, Trond. Number 1, we have to remember the people that are in the jury box. We have to remember who is actually hearing the case. Are they going to have privilege? Have they ever been on a private jet? Have they ever seen $250,000? We have to look at socioeconomically. We have to look at morals and their own personal moral compass. And we have to look at who they are and how they have provided for their family or how they've been provided for. Your uphill battle is an understatement. Pushing a gigantic rock, up mountains and mountains for years, that's what you're doing. If that's the kind of defense that you want, we don't want any part of that. We want a thoughtful, careful, methodical, and the bottom line, we want a connected response when you're connecting to these potential jurors. So, to answer your question, it is a long battle. We haven't even talked about the reputation damage that's happened after these things. And if you look at the people that signaled early, raised their hands, and got an amazing crisis team, they've moved past it and they're already back to work and already making money and revenue and mending and healing their families.